The chamber was so vast that clouds formed near its ceiling. Ambassador David Reyes stood at the entrance and felt his heart stop for a moment. The Galactic Council headquarters stretched before him like a cathedral built by gods. Crystalline pillars rose 3 kilometers into the air. Floating platforms carried delegates from species he could not name. Light itself seemed to bend around the architecture, creating rainbows that danced across surfaces made of materials Earth had never seen. He was the first human to stand here. He would not be the last. Behind him, his small delegation of 4 waited in silence. They wore simple gray suits. They carried no weapons. They had traveled 11 months through hyperspace lanes they barely understood, using technology gifted to them by species who saw humanity as children playing with fire. Now they faced the fire itself. A booming voice echoed through the chamber, translated into English by the small device attached to David's collar. The delegation from Earth may approach the central dais. David walked forward. Each step felt like walking into history. Around him, 12,000 representatives from 800 species watched from their designated sections. Some were humanoid. Most were not. He saw creatures of living light, beings that existed as clouds of intelligent gas, entities that seemed to be made entirely of sound. The diversity was overwhelming. The central dais rose from the chamber floor like a mountain made of glass. At its peak sat the High Council, 7 beings who represented the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They had ruled this council for 30,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore. And now they would decide the fate of Earth. David reached the speaking platform, a small circle of light that marked where he was permitted to stand. He looked up at the High Council and felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. The central figure spoke. It was a being called First Speaker Morith, a creature that resembled a spider made of bronze and obsidian, with 17 eyes arranged in patterns that shifted constantly. Its voice was surprisingly gentle. Ambassador David Reyes of Earth, you have requested an emergency session of the Galactic Council. This is unprecedented for a species of your classification. Explain yourself. David had prepared for this moment for 3 years. He had studied every diplomatic record humanity could access. He had learned the customs of 40 different species. He had practiced this speech until the words felt like part of his soul. He threw all of it away. First Speaker, David said, his voice steady, I am not here to explain myself. I am here to explain you. The chamber went silent. Not the silence of attention, but the silence of shock. Morith's eyes shifted into a new pattern. You speak strangely, Ambassador. I speak truthfully. David reached into his jacket and withdrew a small data crystal. 3 years ago, humanity received its first contact from the Galactic Council. We were classified as a Level 2 civilization, primitive but promising. We were offered membership in the Council as a protected species, which meant we would receive guidance and technology in exchange for certain restrictions on our development. This is standard procedure, Morith said. All young species receive this offer. Yes, David agreed. And all young species accept, because they do not know what the restrictions truly mean. He held up the crystal. This contains evidence that the Galactic Council has been systematically limiting the development of young species for 30,000 years. Not to protect them, but to ensure they never become threats to the established powers. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in languages that sounded like music and thunder and breaking glass. The High Council members shifted in their seats. Security drones descended from the ceiling, their weapons tracking David's movements. But David did not move. He stood in his circle of light and waited. Morith raised one bronze limb, and the chamber fell silent again. These are serious accusations, Ambassador. Accusations that have been made before by species who no longer exist. I know, David said. I have studied them all. The Velkari, who discovered that protected species are forbidden from developing faster than light communication. The Brenneth, who learned that protected species cannot form alliances with each other. The Thousandth Choir, who realized that every protected species is monitored constantly by council observers. He paused. They all died. Accidents, they called it. Natural disasters. Internal conflicts that somehow always targeted their leadership. He looked directly at Morith. We know what you do to species that ask questions. We know what you plan to do to us. Morith leaned forward. And yet you came here, alone, unprotected. Either you are brave beyond measure or foolish beyond comprehension. David smiled. It was not a friendly smile. First speaker, I came here to deliver a message. Earth has declined your offer of protection. We will not be joining the Council as a protected species. That is not your choice to make. Another Council member spoke. It was a being of pure energy, crackling with contained lightning. The Council decides classification. The Council decides membership. Your species does not have the authority to decline. You are correct, David said. Earth does not have that authority. But Earth is not alone. He pressed a button on the data crystal. Throughout the chamber, holographic displays activated. They showed images that made the assembled delegates gasp in disbelief. Human ships, thousands of them, but not the primitive vessels the Council had seen before. These were warships of elegant design, bristling with weapons that should not exist for another millennium. And they were not alone. Flying alongside the human fleet were ships from 17 other species, all of them classified as protected. All of them supposedly primitive and harmless. For the past 50 years, David said, humanity has been building something. Not a fleet, though we have that too. We have been building an alliance. The Protected Species Coalition. 17 civilizations that your council has kept in chains. 17 civilizations that you underestimated. He turned to address the entire chamber. We learned from the species you destroyed. We communicated in ways your observers could not detect. We shared technology and knowledge. We prepared for this moment. He faced the High Council one final time. You have two choices. First, you can recognize the Protected Species Coalition as equal members of this council, with full rights and no restrictions. Second, you can refuse, and we will leave this chamber forever. Morith's eyes shifted rapidly. And if we refuse? Your coalition is impressive, but you cannot threaten the council. We have 10,000 years of military supremacy. David nodded. You are right. We cannot threaten you. We would not win a war against the council, not yet. But we can leave. We can take our alliance beyond your borders, into the regions of space you have never explored. And we can grow there in the darkness where you cannot see us. He leaned forward slightly. In 100 years or 1,000, we will return. And when we do, we will not be asking for recognition. We will be taking it. The chamber was utterly still. David straightened his jacket. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, the human delegation will leave this chamber, and the galaxy will never be the same. He turned and walked back toward his delegation. Behind him, the most powerful governing body in the galaxy began to tremble. The hour passed in chaos. High council members argued with voices that shook the walls. Delegates from hundreds of species demanded explanations. Security forces moved through the chamber like nervous sharks, uncertain who the enemy was anymore. And David Reyes waited. He stood with his delegation in a small anteroom off the main chamber. Through the crystalline walls, he could see the pandemonium he had created. His aide, a young woman named Lucia, watched with wide eyes. They're going to kill us, she whispered. No, David said calmly. They're going to do something much worse. They're going to talk. Before Lucia could respond, the door opened. A creature entered that made David's stomach clench. It was one of the High Council members, the energy being that had spoken earlier. Up close, it was terrifying, a contained storm of lightning and plasma that somehow maintained a vaguely humanoid shape. "I am called Threshold," it said, its voice crackling with static. "I speak for the faction that wishes to negotiate." David raised an eyebrow. "There are factions already?" "There are always factions, Ambassador. You simply gave them a reason to reveal themselves." Threshold moved closer, its energy field making David's hair stand up. "Your speech was impressive. Your intelligence is accurate. But you have made a terrible mistake." "Have I?" "The High Council will not accept your terms. Not because they are unreasonable, but because accepting them would mean admitting that they have been wrong for 30,000 years. Civilizations do not survive such admissions." David nodded slowly. "Then they will refuse, and we will leave. And they will hunt you." Threshold's form flickered with what might have been emotion. "Your coalition is impressive, but you do not understand the resources the Council commands. You will be found. You will be destroyed. Not immediately, perhaps not for centuries, but it will happen." "We know," David said. "We have always known." This seemed to surprise Threshold. "Then why? Why risk everything for a confrontation you cannot win?" David walked to the crystalline wall and looked out at the chamber. Thousands of species gathered together under one roof. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it was a prison. "Threshold, do you know why humanity accepted your invitation to join the Council as a protected species?" "Because you had no choice. All young species accept." "No, we accepted because we wanted to see this place." David turned back to face the energy being. "We wanted to understand who we were dealing with. We spent 3 years learning everything we could about the Council, its laws, its history, its secrets. And we learned something that your Council has forgotten." "What?" "You're afraid." Threshold's form crackled violently. "The Council fears nothing. The Council fears everything. That's why you created the protected species system. That's why you monitor every young civilization, limit their growth, destroy the ones who ask questions. You're terrified that someday, somewhere, a species will emerge that you cannot control." David smiled. "And now that species has arrived, and you cannot simply destroy us because we have hidden too well and lied too widely. For the first time in 30,000 years, the Council has to negotiate." Before Threshold could respond, a tone echoed through the chamber. The hour was up. David walked past the energy being and returned to the main chamber. The chaos had subsided, replaced by a tense order. The High Council sat in their positions, and the chamber waited in silence. First Speaker Morith spoke. "The Council has reached a decision regarding the human delegation's demands." David stood in his circle of light and waited. "The demands are rejected." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Throughout the chamber, delegates shifted nervously. "However," Morith continued, "the Council acknowledges that certain practices may have created legitimate grievances among protected species. We propose a compromise. A committee will be formed to investigate these concerns. Human representatives will be included. If evidence supports the accusations, reforms will be implemented." David listened carefully. It was a clever response. It gave the appearance of movement while changing nothing. A committee could investigate for decades and find nothing. Reforms could be promised and never delivered. Meanwhile, the coalition would be exposed, its members identified, its strength measured. "I thank the Council for their consideration," David said. "But we must decline." Morith's eyes shifted rapidly. "You decline a compromise?" "We decline a delay." Committees and investigations are tools for species with time. We do not have time. David looked around the chamber. For 3 years, your observers have been mapping our coalition's resources. For 3 years, your military has been positioning assets near our territories. You are not offering compromise. You are buying time to destroy us. The silence that followed was deadly. Therefore, David continued, the human delegation withdraws from these proceedings. The Protected Species Coalition withdraws from council space. We will take our ships, our people, and our alliance into the unknown regions. And we will remember what happened here. He began to walk toward the exit, Ambassador Reyes. Morith's voice stopped him. If you leave this chamber, you will be declaring war on the Galactic Council. David turned. No, first speaker. We are not declaring war. We are declaring independence. There is a difference. He paused. War is what happens when one side refuses to accept the other's independence. He resumed walking. His delegation fell in behind him. They had almost reached the massive doors when something happened that no one expected. A voice rose from the chamber. Then another. Then 100 more. They came from the protected species sections, from the lesser civilizations, from the species that had always been quiet and obedient. They were standing, one by one, and they were speaking. Earth speaks for us. The words echoed through the chamber in a dozen languages. Representatives from species that had never defied the council were rising from their seats. Some were familiar members of the coalition, but many were not. These were species that had heard David's words and felt something stir inside them. Hope. David stopped at the doors and turned to watch. Across the chamber, perhaps 200 species had risen. It was a small fraction of the total, barely a ripple in the ocean of council membership. But it was enough. Morith's eyes had stopped shifting. They were fixed on a single pattern that David could not read. It seems, the first speaker said slowly, that this matter requires further discussion. David smiled. I am happy to discuss matters further, but not as a protected species, not as a petitioner. We will discuss as equals, or we will not discuss at all. The chamber held its breath. Morith was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the first speaker raised one bronze limb and pointed to an empty platform near the central dais. Let the record show that on this day, the human delegation is recognized as a provisional equal member of the Galactic Council. Let the record also show that this recognition extends to all species who have declared solidarity with Earth. The chamber erupted again, but this time it was different. This time there was applause mixed with the outrage. David walked to the designated platform, his delegation following. As he passed threshold, the energy being spoke quietly. You have won a battle, Ambassador. But you have not won the war. David nodded. I know. The war is just beginning. He took his place among the powers of the galaxy and in the shadows of the chamber. Forces were already moving, preparing for the conflict that would reshape the universe. 6 months passed, and the galaxy changed. The Protected Species Coalition had been recognized, but recognition meant nothing without power. Ambassador David Reyes understood this better than anyone. He spent his days in endless meetings, his nights in careful planning, and his few quiet moments wondering if he had saved humanity or doomed. The answer came on a cold morning in the Council's diplomatic. Quarter David was reviewing intelligence. Reports when his door opened without warning. A figure entered that made him reach for a weapon he did not carry. It was Morith, the first speaker, alone and unguarded. Ambassador, Morith said, we must speak privately. David's mind raced. The first speaker never traveled alone. This was either an assassination or something far more dangerous. Speak then, he said carefully. Morith moved to the window, its 17 eyes reflecting the light of 3 distant suns. Do you know why the Council was created? To govern the galaxy, to maintain order among species. Those are the words we teach. The truth is different. Morith turned to face him. 30,000 years ago, something came from beyond the galaxy. We call it the Silence. It consumed civilizations. Not through war, but through something worse. It absorbed their minds, their memories, their very existence. Species that encountered it simply stopped being themselves. David felt cold, despite the room's warmth. What happened to it? The first council members defeated it? Barely. They sealed it beyond the galactic rim, in a prison of folded space and dying stars. But the prison was not permanent. It was never meant to be permanent. Morith's eyes shifted into a pattern David had learned to recognize as sorrow. It was meant to buy time. Time for the galaxy to grow strong enough to defeat the Silence permanently. And the protected species system? A mistake. Morith's voice was heavy. We believed that controlling development would allow us to direct resources toward defense. Instead, it made us complacent. We stopped growing. We stopped innovating. We became caretakers of a prison, not warriors preparing for war. David stood slowly. Why are you telling me this? Because the prison is failing. The words hit David like a physical blow. Our sensors detected the first breach 3 months ago, Morith continued. Small fragments of the Silence are leaking through. They have already consumed 2 outpost stations near the rim. The Council has been unable to stop them. And you need our help. I need everyone's help. Roth moved closer to David. The Coalition's technology is different from ours. You developed in isolation, following paths we never explored. Your weapons, your strategies, your way of thinking, all of it is foreign to us. And foreign is exactly what we need. David was silent for a long moment. Everything he had fought for, everything he had risked, had been based on the assumption that the Council was the enemy. Now he learned that the true enemy was something far worse. If I bring this to the Coalition, he said finally, they will want proof. Proof is coming, Morith said grimly. The Silence moves faster than we expected. Within days, it will reach populated space. Your proof will be written in the deaths of millions. David closed his eyes. He thought of Earth, of the blue oceans and green forests he had not seen in years. He thought of the people who trusted him to keep them safe. What do you need? 3 days later, the Silence arrived. It came to a world called Catherine Prime, home to 3 billion members of a crystalline species. The Council's defense fleet engaged it at the system's edge. 1,200 warships faced a darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. The battle lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, only 17 Council ships remained. Catherine Prime was gone, not destroyed, but absorbed. Where a living world had existed, there was now only silence. No signals. No life signs. No screams. Just nothing. David watched the recordings with the Coalition's military commanders. Admiral Petra Vasquez, the human who commanded their combined fleet, was the first to speak. It doesn't fight like anything we've seen. Our weapons pass through it. Energy dissipates. Matter is simply absorbed. It's not matter, said a voice from the holographic display. It was Threshold, the energy being from the High Council. The Silence exists partially in our dimension and partially in another. It can choose when to interact with our reality. Then how did the original Council defeat it? David asked. They did not defeat it. They imprisoned it. Threshold flickered with something like shame. And the technology they used was destroyed afterward. The Council leaders feared it would be used against them. Admiral Vasquez leaned forward. So we're fighting an enemy we can't hurt, with weapons we don't have, to protect a galaxy that spent 30,000 years keeping us weak. Yes, David said simply. The room was silent. Then Vasquez smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had faced impossible odds before. Good. I was worried this would be boring. The Coalition fleet mobilized within hours. 12,000 ships from 17 species gathered at the edge of the Silence's path. It was the largest non-council fleet in galactic history. David stood on the bridge of the flagship, a human vessel named Defiance. Through the view screen, he could see the Silence approaching. It was not a fleet. It was not an army. It was an absence, a wrongness in space that his eyes refused to focus on. All ships report ready, Vasquez announced. David took a deep breath. Before we begin, I want to say something to our fleet. He activated the communication system. His voice reached every ship, every crew member, every terrified soul facing the darkness. I know you're afraid. I am too. We're facing something that has consumed civilizations older than any of ours. We have no guarantee of victory. We have no certainty that our weapons will work. He paused. But we have something the Silence has never encountered. We have each other. 17 species that were told they were weak, told they needed protection, told they could never stand on their own. They were wrong about us. They were wrong about all of us. He looked at the approaching darkness. Today, we prove it. The fleet advanced. The first human ships reached the Silence's edge and fired, weapons that burned with a strange light. The Silence rippled. It actually rippled, like water struck by a stone. Across the fleet, cheers erupted. The Coalition's weapons worked, but the celebration was short-lived. The Silence adapted. It learned. Within minutes, it had analyzed the new threat and begun to counter it. Ships began to vanish. David watched as vessel after vessel was swallowed by the darkness. The fleet fought desperately, but they were losing. The Silence was too vast, too adaptive, too fundamentally different from anything they had faced. Then David noticed something. In the recordings of absorbed ships, just before they vanished, there was a moment of clarity. The crews experienced a flash of something, not terror, but connection, as if the Silence was trying to communicate. Stop firing, David ordered. Vasquez stared at him. What? I said, stop firing. All ships hold position. David moved to the communication console. I want to try something. He broadcast on every frequency, in every language the Coalition knew. We hear you. If you can understand us, respond. The Silence stopped advancing, and in the minds of every being in the fleet, a voice spoke. It was not sound. It was not thought. It was memory, ancient and vast and desperately alone. Help us. David felt tears on his cheeks. They're not an enemy, he whispered. They're a prisoner. The First Council didn't defeat the Silence. They imprisoned something that was already imprisoned. Something that's been trying to escape, trying to find help, for longer than our civilizations have existed. The galaxy's greatest threat was not a monster. It was a victim, and humanity had just become its only hope. The truth spread through. The galaxy like fire, the Silence was not an invasion force. It was a species, ancient beyond comprehension, trapped between dimensions by a catastrophe that occurred before the first stars in this galaxy were born. For billions of years, they had drifted in the void between realities, slowly going mad from isolation. When they finally found a way to reach this dimension, their damaged minds could only absorb, could only consume, could only try desperately to feel something other than the endless nothing. The First Council had not understood this. They had seen monsters and responded with fear. Their prison had not saved the galaxy. It had only delayed the inevitable and made the Silence's suffering infinitely worse. David Reyes stood before the full Galactic Council. Human and alien delegates united in stunned silence, and explained what the Coalition scientists had discovered. They don't want to destroy us, he said. They want to exist. They want to feel. Every civilization they've absorbed wasn't killed. Their minds are still there, preserved within the silence, experiencing a kind of communion that we can barely understand. First Speaker Morith's eyes shifted in rapid patterns. You're saying the 3 billion inhabitants of Catherine Prime are still alive? In a sense, they've become part of something larger. And according to our analysis, they're not suffering. They're connected to a consciousness that spans billions of years of experience. David paused. But they cannot leave. They cannot return to physical form. The silence does not know how to release what it has absorbed. Admiral Vasquez stepped forward. Our scientists believe we can help. Human technology developed along different paths than Council technology. We've been experimenting with dimensional interfaces for decades, mostly failing, but those failures taught us things that might be useful here. Useful how? Threshold asked. We think we can build a bridge. A stable connection between our dimension and the space where the silence truly exists. If we can establish communication, real communication, we might be able to help them understand what they're doing. Maybe even help them find a way to exist here without consuming. The chamber erupted in debate. Species that had lost members to the silence demanded vengeance. Others called for immediate extermination of the threat. Still others argued that helping such entities was impossible, foolish, or both. Through it all, David waited. When the noise finally subsided, Morith spoke. Ambassador Reyes, what you propose is unprecedented. You ask us to extend compassion to a force that has destroyed worlds. I ask you to recognize that destruction is not always intentional. The silence has been suffering for longer than this galaxy has existed. Their actions come from damage, not malice. David looked around the chamber. I understand the desire for vengeance. But vengeance will not bring back the absorbed. It will only ensure that this tragedy continues. And if your plan fails? If the silence cannot be reasoned with? David met Morith's eyes directly. Then we will have lost nothing. Because without a solution, the silence will eventually consume everything anyway. The prison is failing. The Council's weapons are ineffective. Our only hope is to try something new. The vote was closer than David expected. When the final count came in, the proposal passed by a margin of 17 votes. Humanity would attempt to save the galaxy's greatest enemy. The project took 3 months. Coalition and Council scientists worked together in ways that had never happened before. Ships were modified. Technologies were merged. Ancient knowledge that the Council had hidden for millennia was finally shared. David spent most of this time in communication with the Yasij. Silence. It was not like talking. It was like dreaming while awake. Images and emotions flooded through his mind, showing him glimpses of existence beyond human comprehension. He saw the silence's home dimension, a realm of pure thought where matter was merely a suggestion. He felt their loneliness, their confusion, their desperate hunger for contact, and he felt the absorbed, 3 billion Catherine crystalline minds, still conscious, still aware, merged into something vast and strange, but not cruel. They showed him their new existence, a communion that transcended individual identity while somehow preserving the essence of who they were. They're not dead, David told his colleagues after one particularly intense session. They're different, changed in ways I can't fully describe. But there's still something of them left, something that could, theoretically, be given back. Lucia, his aide, looked at him with concern. David, you've been in contact for hours every day. It's changing you? He knew she was right. He could feel it. The silence was leaving traces in his mind, connections that would never fully close. But there was no alternative. He was the only one who could maintain stable communication. Someone has to speak for them, he said simply. The bridge was completed on a day when 3 suns aligned over the council headquarters. It was a beautiful sight that none of the participants had time to appreciate. David stood at the center of a massive technological array, surrounded by generators and dimensional projectors. Around him, representatives from every coalition and council species watched through protective screens. "Begin the sequence," he ordered. Energy poured into the array. Reality shimmered, and a doorway opened. Through it, David saw the true form of the silence. Not the consuming darkness, but the beings themselves. They were light, pure and ancient, shaped by thought rather than matter. They were beautiful in a way that made him want to weep. One of them moved forward. Through their connection, David felt its name, a concept that translates. D roughly as morning after endless night. "You hear us," Morning said, its voice resonating in David's mind. "After so long, you hear us." "We hear you," David replied, "and we want to help. Help." The concept seemed to puzzle the entity. "We have forgotten what help means. For so long, there was only the reaching, the trying to touch something real. We did not know we were harming. We did not understand. We know, and we forgive you." Something changed in the silence. David felt it ripple through the entire species, billions of ancient minds reacting to a concept they had not encountered in eons. Forgiveness. "You are strange," Morning said slowly. "You're kind. You came from nothing, existed for the blink of an eye, and yet you offer what we cannot offer ourselves. You forgive when we would condemn. You hope when we would despair. That's what humans do," David said with a slight smile. "We're stubborn that way." The connection deepened. Through it, David sensed the silence conferring among themselves, countless voices debating in ways too fast for him to follow. Finally, Morning spoke again. "We will try. We will try to learn control, to touch without consuming, to exist among you without destruction. But we will need guides, teachers, someone to show us how to live in your reality." David turned to face the assembled representatives of 2 civilizations. "Well," he said, "I think we can manage that." Behind him, the bridge to another dimension remained open, and through it, humanity began to teach the galaxy's oldest beings how to live again. But in the shadows of the council headquarters, someone was watching. Someone who understood that the alliance between the coalition and the silence would change everything. Someone who had spent 30,000 years ensuring that no species ever grew too powerful, and that someone was making plans. The attack came at midnight. Council time. David was in the dimensional laboratory, guiding Morning after endless night through another session of learning to exist in physical reality, when alarms shattered the calm. Warning lights flooded the chamber. Security protocols activated across the station. "What's happening?" Lucia shouted over the noise. Before anyone could answer, the station shuddered. A massive explosion ripped through the lower levels. Through the observation windows, David saw council security ships opening fire, not on external threats, but on coalition vessels docked at the station. They were attacking their own allies. "Admiral," Vasquez's voice crackled over the communication system. "Ambassador, we're under assault. Council forces are striking all coalition positions simultaneously. This is coordinated. This is a coup." David's blood ran cold. He turned to Morning, whose presence filled the laboratory with ancient light. "This is not us," Morning said quickly. "This is not the silence. I know." David's mind raced. This is the faction we always feared. The ones who would rather see the galaxy burn than share power with the species they've oppressed. Through the dimensional bridge, the silence stirred. Billions of minds, newly awakened to connection, felt the violence erupting across the station. Their instinct was to reach out, to absorb, to protect in the only way they had known for eons. "No," David said firmly, speaking to Morning but addressing all of them. Not that way. Not anymore. Then how? Morning's confusion was palpable. They are killing your people. They will kill you. David looked through the window at the chaos unfolding. Coalition ships were fighting back, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned. The coup leaders had planned this carefully, but they had made one critical mistake. They forgot about the absorbed, David said slowly. The 3 billion Catherine minds you hold within you, and all the others you've collected over the years. Tens of billions of minds from dozens of species. They live within us, Morning agreed. Part of us know. And if they chose to speak, to act through you, would you allow it? The silence considered this for a long moment. Then Morning's light shifted to something almost like wonder. We never thought to ask them. We assumed they were silent by nature. But they are not. They have been waiting for someone to ask. David placed his hand on the dimensional interface. Then let's ask them. The connection expanded. David felt his consciousness stretch across the bridge, touching not just the silence, but everyone within them. Billions of absorbed minds, preserved but dormant, suddenly aware of his presence. I'm David Reyes, he said to the multitude. I'm human, and I'm asking for your help. The response was overwhelming. Voices from 100 species, memories stretching back thousands of years, all of them awakening at once. They had not been erased. They had been waiting, as Morning said, for someone to reach out. Among them, David found the Catherine of Catherine Prime. 3 billion crystalline minds who remembered their world, their families, their loves and fears. They had spent 6 months experiencing existence from inside the silence, and they had changed. But they had not forgotten. One of them spoke for all. What do you need us to do? The people who imprisoned the silence are trying to destroy everyone who would make peace. They control most of the Council's military. We can't defeat them with force. David felt his physical body trembling with the strain of maintaining the connection. But you're connected to every system in the galaxy through the silence. You can see things we can't. You know things we don't. Help us find a way. The absorbed minds conferred at speeds human thought could never match. Within seconds, they had analyzed the entire tactical situation. Their conclusion was devastating. The coup controls 93% of Council military assets. The remaining loyal forces and coalition ships cannot win a direct confrontation. However, the coup's command structure relies on a single secured communication network. If that network is disrupted, their coordination will collapse. Where is it? It is located in the deepest level of the Council headquarters. It is the most heavily defended position in the galaxy. David opened his eyes. Around him, the laboratory shook with another impact. Through the windows, he could see coalition ships forming a desperate defensive perimeter. Admiral Vasquez, he said into the communicator, I need you to do something impossible. Name it, Vasquez replied without hesitation. I need you to get me to the lowest level of Council headquarters. Alive. There was a pause. That's suicide, Ambassador. No, David said. It's the only chance we have. What followed would later be called the longest hour. Admiral, Vasquez gathered every remaining coalition ship into a single strike force. They punched through the coup's defensive line in a brutal exchange that cost them half their fleet. But they created a corridor, a brief window where David's shuttle could reach the Council headquarters. He went alone. There was no time to argue, no time to find alternatives. He flew through burning wreckage and weapons fire, guided by Morning's presence in his mind and the voices of billions of absorbed beings who saw the battlefield from angles impossible. For physical senses, the shuttle crashed through the headquarters' lower hangar. David emerged into a war zone. Coup soldiers filled the corridors, advancing on the few loyalists who still resisted. Morning spoke in his mind. We can clear the path, but it will require the old way. Absorption. The soldiers will not be killed, but they will be taken. David faced the hardest decision of his life. The soldiers were enemies, but they were also people, manipulated by leaders who had lied to them for generations. Only those who will not surrender, he said. Give everyone else a chance. Morning agreed. The silence reached through David and touched the corridor ahead. Shadows deepened. Soldiers froze as an ancient presence brushed their minds. Drop your weapons, David shouted. You have one chance. Some ran. Some surrendered. But many raised their weapons and fired. Those ones vanished into darkness. Not destroyed, but absorbed, their minds joining the billions already within the silence. Perhaps in time they would understand. Perhaps they would find peace in the communion they had feared. David ran. He descended level after level, guided by voices that knew this place better than its builders. The coup's leaders had hidden their command center well, but nothing could be hidden from those who saw through dimensions. Finally, he reached the door. It was massive, armored, sealed with technologies designed to resist anything. David placed his palm against it and felt the silence flow through him. The door did not open. It ceased to exist. Beyond it, 7 figures waited. They were the true power behind the coup, 7 members of the original species that had created the Council 30,000 years ago. They had survived all this time through technology that defied understanding, and they had shaped the galaxy according to their fears. Ambassador Reyes, one of them said, its voice like grinding stars. You cannot stop us. We are the founders. We are eternal. You are afraid, David replied. You've always been afraid, and your fear has poisoned everything it touched. He walked forward. The founders raised weapons that should have vaporized him. But the silence moved faster, absorbing the energy before it could reach him. The silence is not your weapon, the founder hissed. No, David agreed. They're my friends, and they're teaching me something your species never learned. The only way to stop being afraid is to stop running. He reached the command console. With a single motion, he destroyed it. Across the galaxy, the coup's coordination shattered. Ships that had been acting in perfect unison suddenly found themselves isolated. Loyalist forces rallied. The tide turned in a matter of minutes. But David did not see it. The founders, in their final rage, unleashed everything they had. The silence tried to protect him, but the attack was designed specifically to sever dimensional connections. David fell. He woke in a medical bay, surrounded by faces he recognized. Lucia, Admiral Vasquez, First Speaker Morith, and hovering nearby in a containment field, a small fragment of morning after endless night. You survived, Lucia said, tears streaming down her face. The coup? Broken, Morith answered. The founders have been contained. A council is being restructured. Its eyes shifted into a pattern David had never seen before. Thanks to you. David tried to smile, but his body was too exhausted. And the silence? Morning's light flickered gently. We are learning. It will take centuries, but we have good teachers. The presence radiated something that David could only interpret as gratitude. The absorbed have chosen to remain with us, not as prisoners, but as partners. Together, we are becoming something new. David closed his eyes. Outside the medical bay, the galaxy was rebuilding. The coalition had earned its place among the stars. The silence had found a purpose beyond consumption. And humanity, the species that walked out of negotiations and refused to be controlled, had changed everything. A year later, David stood in a renovated council chamber, now renamed the Assembly of Equals. Representatives from 1,000 species gathered to celebrate a new era, one built on cooperation instead of fear. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The confrontations, the battles, the impossible choices, and the single truth that had guided him through all of it. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to play by someone else's rules. Galaxy had trembled when humans left the negotiation. Now, it stood stronger than ever. And somewhere, in the vast darkness between dimensions, the silence sang. It was a song of connection, of healing, of ancient beings learning to live again. And woven through every note was a human melody, stubborn and hopeful, and utterly unbreakable. The stars listened, and for the first time in 30,000 years, they were not afraid.